The barn was alive with noise that morning, boots thudding on packed dirt, the murmur of voices rising like restless cattle, the metallic clang of gates opening and slamming shut. Dust floated in the air, stirred by the constant shuffling of animals being prodded from pen to pen. The smell of hay and manure hung heavy, mixing with the sharp tang of fear that only livestock seemed to sense. This was no place for a newborn, and yet that is where she found herself. Dot the foal entered the auction ring on unsteady legs, each step a painful lurch forward. Her coat still bore the slick sheen of birth, patches of blood and fluid matted against her fragile body. She should have been pressed against her mother's side, nourished and protected, but instead she was shoved into the bright lights of the auction house, another disposable life in the endless cycle of buying and selling. Hush rippled through the crowd, though not out of pity. Buyers craned their necks to get a better look, some frowning, others smirking. She was too small, too raw, too unfinished. A few muttered under their breath, questioning why anyone would bother bringing such a pitiful creature here. To them, she was nothing more than a mistake, a body that would never be worth training, feeding, or investing in. The auctioneer cleared his throat, forcing cheer into his booming voice. All right, folks, what we have here is a fresh one, a foal straight from the pasture, healthy beginnings, strong potential. His words rang hollow. Even he could see the way she trembled, her legs quivering as though the weight of her own body was too much to bear. He clapped his hands sharply, as if sound alone could breathe value into her. The foal's wide, liquid eyes darted around the ring. The shouts, the stomping boots, the clanging metal. It was all foreign, terrifying. She gave a weak, confused nicker, searching for the warmth of the mother she had been taken from. None came. Instead, a handler tugged at her halter, forcing her to circle the ring. She stumbled, nearly collapsing, and laughter erupted from a corner of the crowd. Not worth the feed bill, someone muttered. Won't last a week, another chimed in. The auctioneer ignored them, calling out for bids with mechanical enthusiasm. Who'll start me off? $50? $40? Come on now, look at her lines. She'll grow into something fine, you. Mark my words! But no hands rose. Silence stretched, broken only by the foal's labored breaths. She swayed slightly, the effort of standing draining what little strength she had left. For a moment it seemed the bidding would pass her by entirely, and she would be shuffled out, discarded without a second glance. In that ring, she was nothing more than a number, a lot to be moved along quickly so the real business could continue. Yet even in her fragile state, there was something undeniable about her, a flicker of spirit, a stubborn will to remain upright despite the odds. Most overlooked it, blinded by profit margins and practicality. The crowd grew restless. Boots shuffled. Papers rustled. The auctioneer tried again, lowering the starting price, his voice tightening with frustration. All right, folks, let's not waste time. $30 to start? 20? Still, hesitation hung in the air. Buyers avoided eye contact, waiting for her to be cleared away. The foal, unaware of her own dismissal, blinked against the harsh lights and let out a soft, plaintive whinny. It was the sound of a creature too young to understand abandonment, too new to grasp the finality of rejection. And though no one realized it yet, that single cry, so fragile, so desperate, would not go unheard. The auctioneer's voice began to falter, his practiced cheer thinning into irritation. He could feel the crowd's disinterest like a wall pressing in on him. Come on now, folks. $20 to start. Just 20? His gavel hovered in his hand, but his eyes betrayed the truth. Even he doubted she'd fetch a single bid. The foal stumbled again, her spindly legs crossing awkwardly before she caught herself. A ripple of laughter rolled through the audience. It wasn't kind laughter. It was the sharp, dismissive kind, the kind reserved for failures. "Should have left her where she dropped," a man muttered, shaking his head. "Waste of time," another said, already turning away to check the program for the next lot. The crowd's callousness wasn't unusual. Livestock auctions were not places for sentiment. Animals here were tallied in dollars, valued by weight, bloodlines, or work potential. Buyers prided themselves on keen eyes and hard hearts. Compassion was a luxury, and luxury didn't put food on the table. The foal, though, was more than just unprofitable. She was a liability. Everyone knew the risks. Newborns required round-the-clock feeding, warmth, and care. Without a mother to nurse from, her survival odds were slim at best. Investing time and money into her would almost certainly lead to loss. She wasn't a bargain, she was a burden. The auctioneer tapped the gavel against the podium, more to fill the silence than anything else. His voice grew sharper. "All right, now let's be reasonable. She's young, plenty of time to grow. Somebody give me $10 to start." $10. Anyone? A pause. Then someone snorted from the back. "Not even worth $5." The words cut through the room like a knife, and though the foal didn't understand them, she seemed to feel the sting. Her ears twitched nervously, her head bobbing as she tried to stay upright. A tiny shiver passed along her damp body, and she let out another weak whinny, a sound that echoed in the rafters, ignored by most but unforgettable to the few who truly heard it. Children in the audience, dragged along by parents, leaned forward with wide eyes. Some of them whispered to their mothers, asking why the baby horse was alone, why she looked so sad. But their questions were quickly hushed. This was business, not a petting zoo. The handler in the ring sighed, tugging at the foal's halter. He'd worked countless auctions and knew how this would end. If no bid came, she would be led back out, most likely sold off by the pound or worse. His hand softened for just a moment as he guided her. Rough work had hardened him, but even he couldn't ignore the way she pressed instinctively toward him, seeking comfort she would never find here. The auctioneer, sensing the inevitable, tried one last pitch. "Come on now, folks. Don't make me send her out without a bid. Who'll step up? Just $5. Surely someone's willing to take a chance." Still nothing. The silence was louder than the chatter that had filled the barn minutes before. Buyers avoided his gaze, flipping through their papers, waiting impatiently for the next lot of sturdy colts or seasoned mares. For the foal, the ring was a cruel stage. Every eye judged her unworthy. Every second of hesitation hammered home her worthlessness in this place. She shifted on her legs again, and this time her knees buckled. The crowd tensed, not with worry, but with annoyance, as the handler rushed to steady her. The auctioneer's face flushed red. He raised the gavel as though to bring it down and close the lot unsold. His hand hesitated. He hated when this happened. It slowed the flow, disrupted the rhythm. But rules were rules. If no one bid, she would be removed. Just another failed entry in a long day of business. And so, in that charged moment, it seemed her story would end before it ever began. What no one knew, what no one expected, was that. In the shadows of the crowd, one man's gaze lingered on her trembling form. While others saw weakness, he saw something else entirely. Near the back of the crowded barn, away from the men who hollered and slapped each other's shoulders over deals, stood a rancher with weathered hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. He wasn't the type to draw attention. His hat pulled, low, his shoulders slightly stooped, as if he carried both the years and the weight of his land on his back. He had come to the auction that day with no intention of buying anything. His herd was steady, his barns full. He was there simply to watch, maybe to pick up a small tool or spare part from one of the vendors. Nothing more. But when the newborn foal stumbled into the ring, his chest tightened in a way he couldn't quite explain. At first, he tried to shake it off. He knew the business too well. He knew exactly what he was looking at. A weak, motherless foal, barely clinging to life, paraded around for a crowd that saw no value in her. He told himself he'd seen this before, that he had no room or time for such trouble. Still, his eyes didn't leave her. He noticed details others overlooked, the frantic flick of her ears, the shallow rise and fall of her ribs, the way her knees knocked together every time. The handler tugged her halter. He saw how she fought gravity with every trembling step, how some hidden spark inside her refused to collapse even when her body begged for rest. Around him, men scoffed and shook their heads. "Worthless," one muttered. "A vet bill waiting to happen," another said. The rancher had heard those words 100 times before. He had even spoken them once, years ago, before time and loss had softened him. He shifted his weight, uneasy. His heart was not a soft one by nature. Decades of droughts, long winters, and hard choices had carved out most sentiment. But something about that foal's eyes, dark, wide, desperate, pierced through the armor he thought he had built. They reminded him of something he couldn't name, some memory he didn't want to summon. The auctioneer's pleas grew more strained. $5, folks, just 5 to give this little one a chance. Someone step up. Don't let me walk her out unsold. The rancher's jaw clenched. He could almost hear the unspoken future if no hand was raised. She'd be loaded back into a trailer, hauled off to a fate none of the buyers cared to think about. It wasn't personal, just the way things worked. Not every animal could be saved. But in that moment, it felt personal to him. He remembered the first colt he had ever raised, how he had spent nights in the barn feeding it from a bottle, how the tiny creature had followed him everywhere like a loyal shadow. He remembered the bond, the trust, the life that had grown from care. And he remembered, too, the ache of loss when that colt grew old and passed on. He hadn't realized until now how much that memory lingered. The foal stumbled again, nearly collapsing. A murmur of annoyance swept through the barn, but the rancher took a single step forward. His boots scuffed against the dirt floor, drawing a quick glance from the man beside him. He ignored it. He studied her one last time, searching for a reason not to act. Logic told him to walk away, to let her go, to keep his money and his peace. But his gut, his old, stubborn gut, said otherwise. And when she lifted her head, meeting his gaze across the noisy ring with eyes that seemed to beg for something she couldn't name, his decision was made. The rancher exhaled slowly, his hand twitching at his side. The gavel hovered in the auctioneer's grip. One more heartbeat, and the lot would be closed. Then, quietly but firmly, the rancher raised his hand. The auctioneer's gavel hovered, ready to fall. The foal swayed on her legs, one stumble away from crumpling in the dirt. The crowd was restless, eyes already sliding toward the next page of the program. This lot was over. A waste of time. Then, like a stone dropped in still water, a single movement rippled through the barn. A hand rose from the back. $5, the rancher said, his voice steady, though quiet enough that the auctioneer had to lean forward to be sure he'd heard correctly. For a moment, the entire room stilled. Heads turned. A few chuckled under their breath, disbelief twisting their expressions. Someone muttered, "Fool's throwing money away." The auctioneer's eyes lit up, relief flashing across his face. "I've got $5 right. There in the back. Do I hear 10? He swept his gaze across the crowd, but the buyers had already made up their minds. No one else was going to bid. Not on her. Not when she could barely stand. They didn't want the trouble. Silence stretched, broken only by the foal's uneven breaths. The auctioneer tried again, voice rising with practiced flourish. 10. Do I hear 10? Come on, folks. This is a newborn. Fresh potential. Strong lines. Nothing. Arms crossed, heads shook. A man in the front even waved dismissively, urging the auctioneer to move along. Dot, the rancher's hand, remained steady in the air. His weathered fingers curled slightly, as though holding not just a bid, but a promise. He didn't flinch under the sideways looks or the muttered words about wasted feed and wasted time. He didn't explain himself. He didn't need to Dot. The auctioneer glanced down at the foal. She was trembling again, fighting gravity with every muscle, her eyes rolling toward the crowd as though searching for something, someone. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Sold! $5 to the gentleman in the back." The words echoed through the barn, final and absolute. A deal sealed. Dot. The handler let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and tugged the foal gently toward the exit gate. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some mocking, some pitying, a few simply shaking their heads at the foolishness of it. To them, $5 was $5 wasted, better spent on a hot meal or a coil of rope. Dot. But to the rancher, it was something else entirely. Dot. He lowered his hand slowly, almost reverently, as if the gesture carried more weight than the gavel itself. In his chest, that tightness he had felt earlier loosened, though not entirely. Buying her didn't solve the problem. It only began it. He knew the work ahead would be long, uncertain, and costly. But he also knew, as surely as he knew the seasons would turn and the sun would rise, that leaving her behind had never truly been an option. Dot. The foal glanced back once as she was led away, her ears flicking, her legs wobbling dangerously. Maybe it was coincidence or maybe it wasn't, but her dark eyes locked with the rancher's for a heartbeat before she disappeared through the gate. Dot around him. The auction rolled on. The auctioneer launched into the next lot, the crowds. Attention snapping back to business. Laughter and shouting filled the barn once more. To most, the foal was already forgotten. Dot, but not to the man in the back. For him, the day had changed. His reason for being there had changed. With $5 and a single raised hand, he had bound himself to a fragile life, one that now depended on him for everything. Dot. He pulled his hat lower against the harsh lights, turned from the ring, and started toward the pens where she would be waiting. Dot. Because sometimes the smallest bid is the greatest commitment. The paperwork was swift. 5 crumpled bills passed across a counter, a receipt scrawled without ceremony. The rancher didn't linger. He knew better than to bask in the curious stares and whispered remarks that followed him out of the auction. House. Let them talk. Let them shake their heads. He had no interest in their opinions. His focus was on the fragile creature waiting for him in the holding pen. Dot. The foal stood awkwardly against the wooden rails, her thin chest heaving with effort. The handler who had led her out leaned lazily against the gate, relieved to be rid of the burden. "She's all yours," he said with a half-smile, as though passing on a bad joke. "Good luck keeping her alive." The rancher didn't answer. Instead, he opened the gate and stepped inside. The foal shrank back instinctively, pressing against the boards. Up close, she looked even smaller, her legs too long for her trembling frame, her coat still clinging in damp patches. The sharp scent of birth and fear lingered on her. Dot. He crouched slowly, lowering himself to her level. Years of working with animals had taught him patience. Sudden movements only bred panic. For a long moment, he simply sat, letting her grow accustomed to his presence. Her ears flicked nervously, her eyes darting between him and the open space beyond. Dot. Finally, he extended a hand. She hesitated, nostrils flaring, before taking a shaky step forward. Her muzzle brushed against his fingers, warm and trembling. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it was a beginning. Dot. With gentle persistence, he guided her toward the waiting trailer. She balked at the ramp, her legs splaying dangerously. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low, steady. He tried again, coaxing. Patient. It took several attempts, but at last, with a desperate little leap, she scrambled inside Dot. The rancher secured her carefully, making sure the straw beneath her was thick and clean. Then he shut the trailer door and climbed into his truck. The engine rumbled to life, startling her. Through the slats, he could hear her shifting nervously, hooves scraping against the floor. Dot. As the truck rolled out of the auction yard, the noise and clamor of the barn faded behind them. The road stretched long and quiet, bordered by fields, and fences glinting in the late afternoon sun. Dot inside the trailer, the foal staggered with each bump and turn. Several times he glanced in the side mirror, catching glimpses of her shifting silhouette. More than once, his gut clenched at the sight of her collapsing briefly to her knees before struggling back up. Each time she rose again, stubborn in her will to stay upright. Dot, he kept his speed low, every mile an exercise in restraint. Other drivers honked as they passed, impatient, but he ignored them. For him, the journey wasn't about haste. It was about keeping her alive long enough to reach the safety of his ranch. Dot, as the miles slid by, his mind wandered. He thought of the long nights ahead, the bottles of milk replacer, the hours spent hunched over in a cold barn. He thought of the risk, that despite all effort, she might still slip away. The thought twisted in his chest, but it didn't deter him. If anything, it steeled his resolve. A soft sound broke through the hum of the road. Through the open window, carried faintly on the air, he heard it, a small, wavering whinny. Fragile, uncertain, but alive. Dot. He allowed himself the barest of smiles, the kind that didn't quite reach his lips but warmed something deep inside him. She was fighting. That was enough for now. Dot ahead, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the road. In the distance, the outline of his ranch rose. Familiar fences, the silhouette of a weathered barn, the place where her fight for survival would continue. Dot. And as he turned down the gravel drive, dust rising behind him, the rancher whispered a promise into the quiet cab of his truck. "You're home now." The rancher backed the trailer slowly against the barn, gravel crunching beneath his tires. The sun was nearly gone, the sky painted with streaks of fading orange. Evening had settled heavy over the land, but the day's work was far from done. He opened the trailer door with careful hands. The foal was crumpled in the straw, sides heaving, her legs tucked awkwardly under her body as though she no longer had the strength to stand. For a moment his breath caught. Had the journey been too much? But then she stirred, lifting her head with a weak groan. Relief washed through him, but it was tempered by worry. She was alive, yes, but she was hanging by a thread. Dot, with soft coaxing, he eased her down the ramp, half supporting her trembling frame. By the time they reached the barn, she collapsed entirely, her spindly legs folding beneath her. He dropped to his knees beside her, brushing the damp hair from her face. "Hold on now," he whispered, voice low but firm. "You're not quittin' on me tonight." Within the hour, headlights swept across the yard, his veterinarian's truck. The rancher had called the moment he'd pulled in, knowing this was no job for Chance. The vet, a wiry man with graying hair and a tired expression, crouched beside the foal. His practiced hands moved quickly, checking her heart, her lungs, her gums. He frowned. "She's dehydrated, weak as I've ever seen. No colostrum, no mother's milk. She's got nothing in her system to fight with." The rancher said nothing, only nodded. The vet glanced up, his expression grave. "I'll be honest with you. Odds are slim. Foals this young without their dam. Most don't make it past the first few nights." The words hung heavy in the barn. The rancher's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. "Tell me what to do." The vet gave instructions: formula, frequent feedings, warmth. He administered fluids, his movements brisk but gentle. When he was done, he stood and looked down at the foal, then at the man beside her. "It's going to take round-the-clock care. You'll need to watch her constantly. She'll quit on you quick if you give her the chance." The rancher ran, a hand over his weathered face. Long nights were nothing new to him. He had spent decades rising before dawn, working through storms, nursing cattle through harsh winters. But this was different. This was not a herd or a business asset. This was one fragile life, balancing between survival and silence. "I'll watch her," he said simply. After the vet left, the barn grew quiet again. The only sounds were the foal's shallow breaths and the rustle of straw as she shifted weakly. The rancher laid out thick blankets, set up a heat lamp, and settled beside her. He mixed the formula as instructed, the warm scent of milk filling the air, and carefully eased the bottle toward her mouth. At first she resisted, turning her head feebly. But he persisted, gently rubbing her throat, coaxing her to swallow. Finally she latched. The sucking was weak, halting, but it was there. A flicker of life. The rancher held the bottle steady, patience etched into every line of his weathered face. "That's it, girl," he murmured. "Little by little, you fight, and I'll fight with you." Hours slipped by. He dozed in fits, his back pressed against the stall wall, always waking at the smallest sound she made. Each time she stirred, he rose, checking her, offering her warmth, feeding her again. The barn was cold, the work exhausting, and the outcome uncertain. But as the night stretched on, one truth rooted itself firmly in his mind. If she was going to lose this battle, she wouldn't lose it alone, not while he was there. The first nights blurred together in a haze of exhaustion. The rancher barely left the foal's side. Sleep came in minutes stolen between feedings, his head nodding forward only to jerk awake at the sound of her shifting. His world shrank too, the circle of light cast by the heat lamp, the smell of warm milk replacer, and the fragile rhythm of her breathing. Every 2 hours, he rose to prepare a fresh bottle. His hands, steady from years of work, mixed the powder and water with practiced precision. He tested the temperature on the back of his wrist, then crouched beside her. Sometimes she fought him, her weak head turning away. Other times, she latched, greedily draining the bottle with surprising strength. Each swallow was a victory, each refusal a stab of fear. He kept logs of her progress, marking down ounces consumed, minutes spent standing, breaths taken with ease or struggle. The vet had warned him, "Watch everything." The smallest change could mean the difference between recovery and decline. So he watched, with the intensity of a man guarding something more valuable than gold. During the day, ranch chores still demanded his attention. The cattle needed feeding, fences needed mending, the endless work of the land marched on. But he managed it in short bursts, hurrying back to the barn every hour to check on her. His neighbors might have shaken their heads if they'd known, muttering about foolish attachments, but he didn't care. His priorities had shifted the moment he raised his hand at the auction. Slowly, so slowly it was almost imperceptible, changes began to show. The foal's legs steadied, enough that she could rise with only a little help. Her coat, once damp and matted, began to fluff out under the constant grooming of his brush. Her eyes, wide and dark, lost some of their glassy fear and began to follow him with curiosity. One morning, as the rancher shuffled into the barn with another bottle, she greeted him with a small nicker, a soft sound, fragile yet unmistakable. He froze, the bottle half raised, caught off guard by the simple acknowledgement. Then a rare smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Well now," he murmured, his voice thick with quiet pride. "Guess you've decided I'm worth keeping around." From that day, she began to shadow him. At first, it was only her gaze, her head turning to track him as he moved about the stall. But soon, when her legs grew stronger, she would totter after him, bumping against his side as he worked. He didn't push her away. He let her follow. Let her lean into him when her strength gave out. The bond between them wasn't forged in grand gestures, but in the smallest of moments. The way she nudged his shoulder when she was hungry. The way she settled more easily when his hand rested on her neck. The way his voice calmed her more than the heat lamp ever could. And though he rarely admitted feelings aloud, even to himself, he began to speak to her in the quiet hours. Simple words, low and steady, like the rhythm of a lullaby. "You're doing fine, girl. Just a little more each day. Don't quit on me now." In the stillness of the barn, where only dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight, the sound of his voice became her anchor, and hers, in turn, became his dot. The rancher had taken her in as an act of mercy, a duty born of instinct. But somewhere between the endless bottles, the sleepless nights, and the fragile victories, something deeper had taken root. She was no longer just a foal clinging to life. She was his responsibility, his shadow, his fight dot. And though the struggle was far from over, one truth became undeniable. They were no longer alone in it. They were in it together. The days turned into weeks, each one measured in ounces of milk, hours of rest, and tiny victories. The rancher had stopped counting the sleepless nights. They no longer mattered. What mattered was the steady rhythm of progress, frail at first, but undeniable. It began with something so small he almost missed it. One morning, as he opened the barn door, the foal pushed herself to her feet without his help. Her legs wobbled, but she stayed up, head held high. He paused in the doorway, his breath catching at the sight. For days he had been lifting her, guiding her, coaxing her legs into motion. Now she stood on her own. It wasn't much by most standards, but to him, it was the world. "Look at you," he said softly, a note of pride warming his voice. "Standing tall like you belong here." After that, the changes came quicker. Her appetite grew, her small frame filling out with each feeding. Her coat lost its dullness, taking on a soft sheen under his constant brushing. The hollowness in her eyes faded, replaced with a glimmer that hadn't been there before. But the moment that sealed it came one crisp morning when the frost still clung to the grass outside the barn. He led her into the paddock for a few minutes of fresh air. At first, she clung to his side as always. Then, without warning, she broke into an unsteady trot. The rancher froze, hardly daring to breathe. She moved awkwardly, legs too long for her body, but there was a spark in the way she lifted her head, ears pricked forward, tail flicking in the cool air. She stumbled, caught herself, then trotted again, each stride stronger than the last. Laugh rumbled from the rancher's chest, rare and rough as though he hadn't used it in years. "That's it, girl. Show me what you've got." She circled back to him, nudging his arm as though proud of her accomplishment. He reached out, scratching the soft patch behind her ears. "You keep that up, and I'll have trouble keeping up with you." Hope had a way of sneaking in quietly, hiding in small signs, a steadier gait, a louder nicker, the way she tugged at the bottle with impatience now instead of weakness. Each one was a whisper of possibility, a promise that maybe, just maybe, she would outrun the shadow of death that had loomed over her since birth. The neighbors noticed too. Passing by, they'd see her standing in the paddock, ears alert, body no longer skeletal but filling out with life. Some tipped their hats in acknowledgement, surprised she'd lasted this long. Others chuckled, admitting they'd thought the rancher a fool. He only smiled faintly, never explaining, never gloating. He didn't need to. The proof was in the foal by his side. That night, as he leaned against the stall door, watching her settle into the straw, he felt something stir deep in his chest. It wasn't relief alone, it was pride, and something softer he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. She wasn't just surviving now, she was living. And though the road ahead would still be long, filled with its own risks and hardships, the rancher knew one thing for certain. The foal who had once entered an auction ring, bleeding and broken, had begun to claim her place in the world. She was no longer just a burden, or a gamble, or a desperate act of mercy. She was a promise fulfilled. The seasons rolled forward, carrying with them the slow, steady work of healing and growth. What began as a fragile fight for survival turned into a quiet transformation, one so gradual that the rancher often didn't notice it happening until he looked back. By spring, the foal's frame had filled out. No longer was she the skeletal, trembling creature that had stumbled through the auction ring. Her ribs were less visible, her muscles beginning to shape her once spindly legs. Her coat, brushed daily until it gleamed, caught the sunlight in a soft sheen of chestnut. Every morning she greeted him with a nicker, no longer weak but clear and demanding. She had learned his footsteps, the rhythm of his boots on the barn floor, and would push her muzzle over the stall door before he even reached her. Where once she had clung to him for survival, now she followed him with eager curiosity, nosing at his tools, tugging at his shirt, as though the barn and fields were her playground. The rancher had grown used to her presence at his side. He no longer needed to coax her to stand or beg her to take the bottle. Instead, he found himself teaching her how to walk on a lead rope, how to accept a gentle hand on her neck, how to stand still when he brushed her mane. She learned quickly, not with fear, but with trust. The first time he opened the paddock gate wide and let her run, she took off like a shot. The sight stopped him cold. Her legs, once weak and uncertain, stretched long and strong across the pasture. Her head lifted high, mane flying, tail streaming behind her. She bucked and leaped, as if reveling in the simple miracle of her own strength. The rancher leaned against the fence, arms crossed, a rare smile etched deep into his face. "She's something, ain't she?" he murmured to himself. Neighbors who had once scoffed at his purchase began to soften their tone. They saw her thriving, saw the bond between man and foal, and admitted, sometimes with a shake of their heads, that maybe it hadn't been such foolishness after all. One even remarked, "She's turned into a fine little filly. Didn't think she'd last a week." The rancher only shrugged, offering no explanation. He didn't need their validation. He had the proof running circles in his own fields. But the transformation wasn't only in her body. There was spirit in her now, something that had been only a faint flicker in the auction ring. She was bold, testing boundaries, pushing her nose into feed buckets she had no business in, or nipping playfully at his sleeve. At times, she was stubborn, refusing to walk when led, planting her hooves in the dirt until he coaxed her with patience and a steady hand. He welcomed these battles. They were signs of life, of will, and she, in turn, had transformed him. The rancher who had once gone about his days with quiet routine found himself lingering longer in the barn, speaking aloud more often than he ever had. He told her things he wouldn't tell another soul, grievances about the weather, worries about the herd, memories of colts and mares long gone. She listened with calm eyes, her breath warm against his shoulder. As summer deepened, the foal was no longer simply surviving under his care. She was thriving, a creature of strength and spirit who carried in her every stride the proof of what patience and determination could build. She had been bought for $5 and a flick of the hand. Now she was priceless. Years slipped by, marked not in days or months, but in the steady rhythm of ranch life, the rise and fall of seasons, the turn of fields from green to gold to white again. The foal who had once entered an auction ring bleeding and trembling was no longer a fragile shadow of herself. She had become a horse in full, strong, sleek, and radiant. Her coat gleamed in the sun, a rich chestnut that rippled with muscle as she moved. Her stride, once clumsy and uneven, now carried power and grace. She could run the length of the pasture with a speed that left the wind struggling to keep pace, her mane flying like a banner of defiance against the fate she had escaped. The rancher stood by the fence line one late afternoon, leaning on the weathered rails, watching her race across the open field. His hat was tipped low, his hands rough and scarred from decades of work, but his eyes followed her with a softness few ever saw. She wasn't just a horse to him, she was a story written in flesh and bone, in survival and stubborn will. Neighbors sometimes asked why he kept her. She wasn't bred for show, nor for racing, nor even for heavy ranch work. She didn't carry the pedigree that fetched high prices. But when those questions came, he only smiled that small, quiet smile of his. The answer was too simple, too sacred to put into words. As he watched her kick up her heels and buck playfully into the air, memories pressed in, the auction barn heavy with dust and doubt, the sound of jeers as she stumbled, the way her legs had nearly buckled beneath her. He remembered the vet's grim warnings, the long nights of bottles and blankets, the exhaustion that settled into his bones but never quite broke him. He remembered her first nicker, her first trot, her first gallop across this very pasture. And now, here she was, alive, thriving, free. She slowed, trotting back toward him, her ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring with the thrill of her run. She stopped just short of the fence, pressing her muzzle against his chest. He chuckled, rough and low, and scratched the familiar spot behind her ears. "Still my shadow, huh?" he murmured. She blew warm air against his shirt, nudging him insistently, and he laughed again, a sound more frequent these days because of her. He rested his forehead briefly against her, feeling the steady strength in her breath, the solidity. In her presence. This horse was more than a reminder of what he had saved. She was a reminder of what saving had done for him. In giving her life, he had found something of his own restored, a sense of purpose, of connection, of quiet joy that had long been dulled by the grind of years. The rancher stepped back and watched as she trotted away again, her silhouette gilded by the sinking sun. The sky stretched wide and endless above them, the same sky that had witnessed her first fragile breaths, her uncertain steps, her battles fought and won. $5. That was all it had taken to claim her, all it had taken to change the course of her life. And in some unspoken way, his. And as she disappeared into the horizon of his fields, he whispered, almost to himself, a truth he had known all along. She was never mine to own. She was mine to keep safe.